Not a city, not a province, but an empire so massive that it spanned from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, from the cold north of Siberia all the way down into Central Asia and beyond. You'd see its name etched in French maps, in Dutch maps, in German, Italian, and even British maps. The consistency was staggering. Different cultures, different centuries, yet the same vast land labeled the same way. Tartaria wasn't a vague term. It was a cartographic certainty. Some maps even broke it down. Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Russian Tartary. These weren't mythological lands. They were geopolitical designations, clearly identified and consistently drawn. So how does something so big just disappear? That's the first mystery. Because if you look at maps today, Tartaria is gone completely, like it never existed. And no, it didn't fade slowly. It vanished suddenly within a few short decades. One moment the name is everywhere, the next nothing. No empire, no mention, no explanation. Even geography books from the 20th century omit it entirely, as if the entire region had been quietly renamed, redrawn, and rewritten. Historians today will tell you it was just a misunderstanding. That Tartary was a general European term for unknown Asian territories, a sort of placeholder for lands not yet explored. But that doesn't explain the detail. It doesn't explain the boundaries. And it certainly doesn't explain why dozens of maps across different empires all agreed on its scope. This wasn't medieval fantasy. These were Enlightenment era cartographers, precise, detailed, methodical, and they all drew Tartaria. So what changed? Why did map makers suddenly stop using the term? Why did the largest empire on their charts get deleted like a line in a bad script? The answer, some believe, is chilling. Because Tartaria wasn't just erased from maps. It was erased from history, from education, from public memory, as if someone wanted us to forget it ever existed. But why? Was it a simple case of nomenclature falling out of use? Or was there something deeper, something more deliberate, something being hidden? The deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because it wasn't just the name that disappeared. It was the architecture, the cities, the people, all the fingerprints of an advanced civilization wiped away. But the traces remain. And if you follow those traces, they'll lead you to grand buildings in strange places, to buried cities, impossible timelines, and a technology that modern engineers still don't fully understand. And they all whisper one name: Tartaria. If Tartaria was real, the most obvious proof would be the maps. Not legends, not myths, but physical documents, hand-drawn and printed by the most respected cartographers of Europe. And guess what? These maps still exist, hidden in archives, antique libraries, and private collections. They show an empire, immense in scale. You don't need to believe in theories, just look at the evidence. Take the map of Giacomo Gastaldi from 1562. There it is. Tartaria, a vast stretch of land east of the Caspian Sea, bleeding into what we now call Siberia and Mongolia. Then look at the Mercator map of 1595. Again, Grand Tartary. And again in 1701 on the maps of Guillaume de Lisle. Time after time, across 3 centuries, the name Tartaria stands firm. But what's more revealing isn't just that Tartaria is marked, it's how it's marked. With clear borders, with cities, with rivers, mountains, and trade routes. This was somewhere in Asia. It was mapped with intention, like you would map a real, functioning empire. These maps weren't made by amateurs. They were commissioned by kings and emperors. They were used to plan expeditions, wars, and trade. Cartography back then wasn't fantasy. It was power. And Tartaria was on the map for hundreds of years. So the question becomes, why was it removed? Around the early 1800s, a strange thing began to happen. Newer maps started replacing Tartaria with new national identities. What was once Chinese Tartary became simply China. Russian Tartary became part of the expanding Russian Empire. Independent Tartary vanished altogether. The name was scrubbed from atlases, censuses, and educational records. No official announcement, no historical reckoning. Just gone. By the end of the 19th century, you could flip through every major world atlas and not find Tartaria anywhere. Did the land disappear? No, but the label, the identity, was erased, replaced with modern names and boundaries. The old was overwritten, and no one seemed to notice, or no one was supposed to, because this wasn't just cartographic evolution, it was a reset. And when you erase a name from the map, you erase the people, you erase their stories, their language, their knowledge, and eventually even their memory. But history leaves scars, and maps are hard to burn. Some survived. And those maps are now the forbidden documents. The kind that Tartarian researchers pore over, page by page, detail by detail. Because hidden in those lines are questions no one wants to answer. Why did they all agree on Tartaria's borders? Why did they all describe the same land, the same cities, the same trade networks? And why, most of all, did it all stop, suddenly, in the same few decades? This is where things begin to unravel. Because if Tartaria was an empire, advanced, organized, and known, then its disappearance wasn't an accident. It was an erasure. And if it was erased, who had the power to do it? Before we go deeper into that, let's explore what they left behind. The cities, the architecture, the structures that modern builders still struggle to explain. Because the empire may be gone from maps, but its fingerprints remain, buried, hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. If Tartaria truly vanished, there should be no trace of its presence, no ruins, no relics, no memory. And yet, its shadows linger. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, something strange began happening in cities across the Western world. Suddenly, massive buildings began to appear. Government halls, train stations, courthouses, museums, gigantic structures with towering domes, endless columns, and ornate carvings that rivaled the finest palaces of Europe. They called it neoclassical architecture. They said it was inspired by ancient Greece and Rome, but look closely. These buildings didn't just resemble the old world, they exceeded it, with precision that stunned even modern engineers. With a scale that demanded more than horse-drawn labor and hand tools, and with speed that defied logic. Take the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. In just 2 years, Over 600 acres of monumental architecture rose from what was essentially swamp. Buildings so large they could swallow cathedrals, so beautiful they were called the White City. And yet barely a trace remains today. Why? Because nearly all of it was demolished. The official story claims the buildings were temporary, built from plaster, designed to impress, never meant to last, but the photographs tell a different story. Look at the windows, the joints, the stonework. These weren't movie sets. They were masterpieces, too advanced, too costly, too perfect to be temporary. And Chicago wasn't the only one. In San Francisco, after the devastating 1906 earthquake, the city was quickly rebuilt with structures even more ambitious. Just 9 years later, in 1915, came the Panama Pacific International Exposition. Once again, a grand showcase of impossible architecture. And once again, nearly all of it was destroyed. Why build something so magnificent only to erase it? Tartarian researchers believe these weren't newly built structures at all. They were inherited, remnants of an older, forgotten civilization, renovated, rebranded, and then quietly removed, not because they were decaying, but because they didn't fit the narrative. Think about it. How could a young nation like America, barely out of its frontier days, suddenly master architecture that rivaled ancient empires? How could so many cities, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia, build massive stone buildings in record time, without modern machinery and without the labor pool to sustain it? The answer may lie not in what they built, but in what they found. Perhaps these cities weren't building something new. They were building over something ancient. And to maintain the illusion of progress, they claimed it all as their own, declared it temporary, and wiped it away. But even as they tried to bury the past refused to stay hidden. Because all across the world, from Russia to the United States, these structures shared the same design language. The same domes, the same arches, the same impossible scale, different countries, different architects, same fingerprints, who really designed them, and more importantly, why did they all disappear in the same historical window, when Tartaria vanished from the maps? The deeper we go, the more the timeline begins to fracture, and soon we'll uncover something even stranger. Not just lost cities, but cities that appear to be sinking, and a flood, unrecorded in any official history, that may have buried an entire civilization. Walk through any old city and you might notice something odd. Windows buried beneath the sidewalk, entrances that now lead underground, basements that used to be first floors. Tartaria theorists call this the Great Mud Flood. They believe that in the 1800s, a sudden catastrophe buried entire cities in mud and debris, leaving only rooftops and upper floors above ground. Mainstream historians say it's just urban development. Over time, streets rise. Foundations sink. It's normal, but here's the problem. This sinking happened globally within the same time frame, from Seattle to St. Petersburg, from New York to Paris. Everywhere, buildings seem buried, fast, deep, and forgotten. Seattle's underground is one example, a fully built city now beneath another. San Francisco, too. After the 1906 earthquake, workers found intact facades underground. Not rubble, but preserved structures. Same with New York's subways, stonework deep below known history. If this was natural, where's the documentation? If it was gradual, why so sudden and so widespread? Some believe the mud flood wasn't just a disaster, it was a reset, one that buried Tartaria, its cities, its technology, and its story. And if that's true, the next mystery is even stranger, because not only were their buildings buried, they may have been built to harness energy. Across the world, one architectural pattern keeps appearing, but no one talks about it. They're called star forts, geometric, massive, and eerily precise, shaped like stars, built from earth, stone, and sometimes brick. You can find them in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, all built before modern equipment, all following the same exact design principles, no matter the culture or continent. Mainstream historians say they were military structures, fortifications designed to resist cannon fire. But look again. Their angles are too perfect, their symmetry too advanced, and many were built in places with no known history of battle. Tartaria theorists believe these forts were not for war but for energy. Their layout follows principles of resonance, vibration, and electromagnetic flow. The shapes, spikes, moats, concentric layers aren't just beautiful. They're functional, designed to channel energy, not stop armies. And that's not all. Step inside a cathedral, a courthouse, or an old government building. Speak a single word and hear it echo perfectly through the halls. The acoustics are supernatural. Your voice carries. It amplifies, as if the building itself is alive. Why would 1800s architecture care so much about sound? Tartaria researchers propose a radical idea. These weren't just public spaces. They were resonance chambers, built to harness frequencies. Recent science supports this. Sound waves can move objects, change water structure, even affect human biology. So what if the Tartarians knew this long ago? What if their buildings could transmit energy through air, through sound, without wires, without fuel? No smoke, no pollution, just clean, harmonic power. Think about it. How did they build massive structures so quickly, without machines? How did they transport multi-ton stones across continents? Maybe they didn't need cranes. Maybe they used sound. If true, this changes everything. It would mean Tartaria wasn't just a forgotten empire. It was a civilization that had unlocked something we still don't understand. Something dangerous, something powerful, and maybe that's why it had to be erased. Because free energy, if real, would destroy entire industries. Oil, coal, electricity, even modern governments. But the buildings still whisper the truth. Through their shape, their structure, their silence, and their impossible perfection. Now imagine if they could harness energy. Who were they building it all for? Because the next theory is even more unbelievable. Giants among us, who were the Tartarians really? When you walk through an old Tartarian-style building, something feels off. Doorways rise over 15 feet high. Stair steps are so large that climbing them feels unnatural. The ceilings are massive, towering far above your head. Was all of this really just for style? Tartaria researchers believe the answer is no. They claim the Tartarians were actual giants. These buildings were not built to impress. They were built to fit the people who lived inside. In the 1800s, newspapers across America reported discoveries of oversized skeletons. Some were over 7 feet tall. Others exceeded 9 or even 10 feet. Many of these remains were said to be sent to the Smithsonian, but today no trace of them remains. No displays, no access, no public records. Mainstream historians say giants are a myth, but nearly every ancient culture tells stories of giant beings. The Nephilim in the Bible, the Titans in Greek mythology, giant warriors in Native American legends. What if those were not just stories? If that is true, then Tartarian architecture makes perfect sense. These buildings were not made for people like us. They were made for people much larger. And if such a race once existed, their disappearance may not have been natural. It may have been intentional. Someone may have wanted them erased from history. If Tartaria was real, if it was advanced, if it threatened the official version of history, then erasing it would require more than silence. It would require a reset, not just of memory, but of cities, of maps, of evidence. Tartaria researchers call this the Great Reset, a coordinated effort to erase all traces of an old world and replace it with a controlled narrative. Look at the disasters of the late 1800s and early 1900s. They were not random, they were precise, and they targeted specific places. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, officially blamed on a cow kicking over a lantern, but the destruction was suspicious. Simple wooden houses survived, while massive stone buildings burned to the ground. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906, not only did the city collapse, but the rebuilding allowed new street plans and the removal of countless buried structures. World War I, World War II, the Spanish flu pandemic, each disaster brought with it a rewriting of history, a clearing of records, a destruction of architecture, and always a step away from the past. Tartaria's cities were gone. Its name was deleted, its buildings either buried or burned, and those who remembered faded with time. The timing is too perfect. As Tartaria vanishes from maps, these disasters increase in frequency. As strange buildings are questioned, they are demolished. As bones are uncovered, they are quietly taken away. Was this all by chance, or was it a global cover-up? If so, then we are not living in the first version of history. We are living in the new one, the one built after the reset, and the next clues are not in books. They are in the photos. Photos taken at the edge of the old world and the new, and what they reveal is deeply unsettling. If Tartaria was erased, there should be no trace of its people. But there is one strange leftover: photographs. Late 1800s to early 1900s, the era of early photography. Cities had grown, populations had exploded. Yet in photo after photo, something feels wrong. The streets are empty, not quiet, empty. No pedestrians, no horses, no carts, no shopkeepers, no crowds. These are not photos of back alleys. They are major boulevards, public squares, train stations, capitals. The explanation given is technical. They say old cameras had long exposure times, that people walking would not appear in the photo. Only stationary objects would be captured. But that does not explain everything, because these cities do not look like they are in motion. They look abandoned. There are no signs of movement, no blur, no shadow of a passerby. Some of the most iconic images of cities like New York, London, and Berlin show vast, perfect architecture, but nothing else. No life, no energy, no sound. It feels staged, as if the buildings had been set, as if the cities were prepared, waiting for someone to arrive, waiting for a new population. Tartaria theorists call these the reset cities, places inherited, not built, photographed during the transfer, before new life was added, before history was written. If this theory is true, then many cities we call modern may not be ours at all. They may be reused, their original builders gone, their purpose lost, their origin erased. And now comes the final question. If this was a handover, if the buildings were real, if the photos show empty cities, then who were the Tartarians, and where did they go? The answer may lie in what came before the flood, before the wars, before the reset. The answer may lie in the first civilization, the one even older than Tartaria, the one called Mu. We followed the maps. We uncovered the architecture. We questioned the disasters. We looked beneath the ground, and we found silence where history should speak. Tartaria may have been more than an empire. It may have been a different world. A world built on energy, geometry, harmony, and scale beyond our understanding. A world of giants, of sound and structure, of power we can no longer access. Then came the reset, the fires, the floods, the wars. And suddenly it was gone, not just buried, but erased from maps, from books, from memory. And now we are left to ask a question no one dares to answer. If this really happened, what else have we forgotten? What other civilizations were wiped away before Tartaria, and who controls what is remembered? Maybe Tartaria was not the first. Maybe it was only a remnant, a shadow of something even older, even more powerful. Because long before the name Tartaria appeared on maps, another name was whispered, a name said to be the origin of all human civilization, a place called Mu, the mother civilization. In the next episode, we will dive into the forgotten world of Mu, an ancient land said to be the birthplace of knowledge, spirit, and the stars. A place that may have seeded every great civilization on Earth, and perhaps even beyond. So ask yourself, what if history is not just incomplete? What if it was designed to be incomplete? Thank you for watching. If this story made you question everything you've been told, let us know in the comments. Have you seen strange architecture in your city? Do you believe the past is far older than we think? We want to hear your theory. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next video.